Thanks for joining the Dating with Katy podcast with your favorite matchmaker, Katy Clark. I'm here to get you confident, be successful, and to have some fun dating. So let's talk about all things life, love, and relationships. And today I have a great guest with me. He just put this book out, Date Smarter. For all of you singles out there who are still single, Tim Molnar is here to help you date smarter. Tim Molnar, author of Date Smarter, is a dating coach who helps people find love using research-backed strategy. Yes, the social sciences. I was a sociology major, and all the insights. He's a former Fulbright teaching fellow, and you will hear that in his vernacular on the podcast today, and a university lecturer. Tim blends scholarship with practical experience to transform how you guys are going to approach your modern dating. His unique methods empower clients to date smarter, build confidence, and create meaningful relationships. So let's welcome Tim. Well, thanks for joining me, Tim. It's so exciting to have you. Book author, sociologist, thinker, and a guy who's trying to figure out how to date smarter. Fill us in on how you got to this place.
Yeah, so I think in the research world, we often like to say that research is me search. And so while I was in graduate school and I was working with a number of different behavioral economists, sociologists, always very interested in human behavior. And at the same time, in my personal life, trying to figure out what did it look like to find a girlfriend? What did it look like to find a life partner? And my curiosity kind of took me to this place of, I wonder if there's something in the academic journals or literature that's been written to help me do this in a more strategic way to improve my probabilities for finding what it was that I wanted. And that led to a multi-year dating venture, turned into dating coaching, and eventually the lessons learned from all of those things became the book Date Smarter.
Well, and I love that you brought up the word strategy. So I do believe dating is a skill set. I believe it's a numbers game. There is definitely ways to get more dates, have more fun dates, be a more fun dater. And so these are skills that people need to learn. But in the process, people need to have some sort of something to hold on to of like, yes, I can make it. Yes, there's hope at the end of the tunnel. I had a girlfriend, she just recently got engaged, and she was like, I'm never going online. I said, well, good luck. IRL is not easy, although you promoted a lot. I love, you gave some good strategies in your book. But she actually calculated how many dates she went on, and I use her story a lot. She went on 30 Bumble dates, and then she found literally like a Mr. Perfect for her. But it's 30 Bumble dates. And then with that, how many people are you swiping on? How many lame guys do you have to go through? And this goes both ways. There's lame women, but she's like, I kissed a lot of frogs to find my prince. And she always had a good attitude about it, but it's in that stage of like 30. People are like, what? I just had a new coaching client. She just got on Bumble. We got great pictures, cute little bio. And she already swiped on this photo of some like gross guy in a Speedo. Like, she's like, I'm done. I'm like, nope, we got to move forward. So, so tell us about this. So here's a question for you. You're a dating coach, but you're dating. Like, how does that work? Like, wouldn't you think someone should be already married or like in a deep relationship to give dating advice? How do you being able to give dating advice to someone who's dating, even though you're dating?
So a quick correction. So I've been dating my partner for about 5 years now,
Oh,
but
good.
I
Okay.
had started this work, and I think that's where the question comes from. I had started this work when I was dating, when I was actively
Okay.
dating. And so that was something where I think there is a lot to going through this, understanding, having empathy for what people are experiencing, being present with the dating trends yourself. And then I also think that there's some wisdom that you can gather from being on the other side of this and saying, great, here are the things I tried. Here are the 47 first dates I went on. Here's the journal I kept of all of these dates. Here's the relationship research that I read. And these are the findings after working with dozens and dozens of clients that I can take and move forward in my coaching journey here.
Okay, so it is good that you've got some truth in. You found a partner. You've been 5 years together. Congrats, that's amazing. And so let's ask the harder questions. How do people stay encouraged in the dating process?
Yeah, I think encouragement is really tough. I think when we think about dating burnout today,
Yes.
Forbes published something last May saying more than 80% of people have experienced dating burnout. And we can think about all these other areas of our life where we see incremental progress along the way. And you can think
Mm.
about going to the gym. And if you have a goal to put on muscle mass or lose certain weight, and you can see the pounds slowly come off the more days that you go to the gym, the more regular you are with your routines, the more green smoothies you're substituting for whatever else. And I think in the dating world, yes, we can go on dates, but sometimes it feels like this binary thing where either we're in the relationship that we want or we don't. And so I think that's one of the big pieces that can drive burnout. And I think also when we look under the hood a little bit of these algorithms that we're turning to for our dating lives and thinking about how are these developed, what types of goals do stockholders and developers of these apps have, and
Mm.
are those aligned with our own goals? And I think the answer is often no. And so that I think in and of itself can lead to a lot of burnout where we have this paradox of choice. Our brains are
Right.
not designed to be able to sort through more than a handful of options, and yet we're
Right.
inundated with all of this choice, and it can
Can we
feel
can
very
we take a
seductive. Yeah, yeah.
time out right there because you have a great story in there about jelly, the jammed. Okay, so in your book, and I love theories are great, but show me practical. So talk about that. I don't know if you want me to pull it up, but one group was given so many jams or jellies to taste and then choose from, and then the other group was given this many. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the paradox of choice is something that's been popularized by a sociologist at the time who was at Swarthmore College named Barry Schwartz. And it's the idea that we've been talking about where we know this intuitively that more choices are not always better when we show up to the ice cream store and there are
Right.
150 flavors. It's super overwhelming.
Yeah.
And one of the foundational studies was done by a group of researchers over at Columbia, and they went into a grocery store and they had this idea of they would either give a large number of jams to customers or a much smaller sample.
Samples, right?
And what they found was people loved to sample when there were a lot of options. So you're giving people 24 options, 30 options, whatever it might be. People really enjoy that. But then when they looked, did this convert to purchasing? They found that no, with a very, very small percentage of people, it led to purchasing decisions. Whereas those who had six options, they were able to say, great, I like the blueberry better than the mango, and the mango better than the yuzu marmalade, or whatever it might be. And then make a choice that our brains are intuitively wired to be able to do. And so it draws a very clear parallel in the online dating world. And I think it's something that is worth keeping in mind as we go through this. And some of the apps are beginning to catch on to this. And so Hinge now limits the number of people that, of course, you can respond to if you have unresponded to messages. And I think that
Great.
is very helpful, but certainly not all apps are taking that approach.
Yeah, that's accountability. I mean, I've had clients in the past for matchmaking. They just want a candy store. They just want, who's next, Katie? I'm like, no, I'm not a candy store. I'm here to create relationships. I have to be very mindful of the kind of client that I have. Not my favorite kind of client, but they're out there. So I love that theory that because it is true. I remember I had come home from a trip. I'd lived in China for many years and came home to buy I was visiting home and I decided to go to Walmart one morning and I needed hair conditioner. I couldn't believe the amount of choices of hair conditioner there was in the aisle. And I couldn't figure out what kind of hair I had. I'm like, is it frizzy? Is it dry? Is it overly dry? I actually remember leaving. I just didn't even buy any conditioner because I was overwhelmed with the choice. And this is just conditioner, let alone a life partner. So I think it's absolutely vital to just kind of really what I call it the picture frame. So people love this idea of, oh, he lives in New York or he's of a whole different background. There's a lot of complexities to that. And when I say the picture frame, it's like their picture frames look like yours. It's back in the day when Grandma Betty and Aunt Nancy lived on the same street and they're like, oh, I have a niece and I have a nephew and let's put them together because that background is going to be a lot more similar so you can do life together versus the excitement and the glitter and the pizzazz of, oh, look at this is how she looks exotic. Sometimes men are like, I want somebody exotic. I'm like, no, you need the girl next door, okay? Because that's your lifestyle. So I love that you brought that up. And you brought up something else going back. You said, what is and forgive me if I say this wrong, but you have to look at what the reasoning is. I mean, these apps want you to stay on. They want you to pay. So for them, it's good if we're never in relationships, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, so they work off of intermittent reward systems. And
Mm.
basically, this is an extremely addictive tendency. It's the same idea behind how slot machines are developed, and you've probably heard this talked about. But the idea is we don't know when we're going to get that validation, that dopamine spike. And we swipe a few times, and maybe it comes after swipe 3 one time, maybe it comes after swipe 36 the next time. And this unpredictability has been shown to be highly addictive. And it was originally something that had been shown by this psychologist by the name of B.F. Skinner back in the 50s. And he did this experiment with pigeons where he had two separate groups of pigeons and they would press on a lever and get rewarded with a little food pellet. And after a certain number of times, he would switch up the reward structure. And so there would be a more predictable reward for one group of pigeons, and they would press on the lever, get the pellet. And when they hit the lever and no longer were getting food, what the pigeons would do is they'd stop hitting the lever. They kind of figured it out. But then he had a second group of pigeons, and those ones were delivered an intermittent reward schedule. And so they would hit not knowing exactly when it was going to come. And what he
Ooh,
found is, I know, is it's kind of this.
maybe this time. Maybe this time. Oh goodness. It's true.
And then what he found was even after the food stopped coming out, the pigeon would continue to hit the lever until they would pass out from exhaustion. And so it was just this incredibly addictive behavior that then went, like I said, into developing slot machines. And then it was something that Tinder decided to do when they rolled out, the swipe-based app back in like circa 2010.
Yeah, interesting. I always encourage people every 15 minutes is 1% of your day. So do 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, and leave it. Otherwise, people become exhausted by it, but it is also that same like, ooh, like who looked at me today? Great insight. And I love how you know the sociologist who does all this. I'm just kind of a roundabout girl who's like, yeah, that's cool. So fantastic. Now let's really talk about apps versus in real life. And we do have to get to your numbers game, like how you decide. And you have this whole mathematical equation. It's actually on your Instagram at Date Smarter. So tell us that first, and then tell us what you think between in real life and online dating.
Yeah, so I think some thoughts on dating in real life versus dating online is that people need to do what feels good to them.
Okay.
But I think where my perspective comes from is rooted in data. And one of the things we know is starting in 2017, there's a sociologist over at Stanford by the name of Michael Rosenfeld who studies how people meet and stay together. And he's been doing this longitudinal study. And
Is it kind of like the Gottmans?
he's similar in that he studies a lot of behavioral and relationship science.
Okay.
And so, yeah, in a very similar field. And what we know from his research is that as of 2017, people meet online more than any other place. And so, when we reduce the question to do apps work? Clearly, they work for a lot of people. But then when we expand that definition and push on a little bit and tease out some nuance of what do we mean by work, for a lot of people, if you're seeking validation on these, if you're hoping for a partner but just meeting dead ends, if you're going on so many dates that you can't focus on what really matters in terms of the qualities that lead to good partnerships, then I think we can maybe say that like those aren't working for you. And so I like to say that apps are great servants, terrible masters. And so,
Okay.
like you were saying, if you set healthy guardrails around them and to use your example, 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, and you're using these as introduction tools as opposed to validation tools, then I think they can be very helpful. And if you're finding yourself burnt out, then I think you need to re-examine your strategy.
Take a minute. I mean, and you've got to go into this having your foundation set and who you are, what you're going to put up with. I call that the standards. I have one of my first podcasts, I think it's podcast 3, is the 4 foundations to date. You got to have fortitude. I mean, you got to be in it. Like you got to be ready for some silliness and some ridiculousness and some ghosting. It's all going to be a part of the game. And I hate to say it, it is a game. I use that word just so that you can strengthen up. Like if you're going to play a game and be good at it, you got to know the rules. You kind of got to know what you're coming against. So let's talk about your date number. Again, this is the math behind it. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit of the genesis maybe, and then talk about how some of your listeners, if this idea resonates with them, might be able to apply it in their own life. So I had alluded to at the beginning of our conversation that I was frustrated in my late 20s with dating and wanted to feel like I had a little bit more control over this thing that inherently requires some serendipity and luck
Right.
and fate and universe intervention. But I also felt like there was this idea that we could manifest a degree of fate, that we could create this sort of intentional serendipity, put ourselves out there, create agency. And so I decided to take this reverse engineering approach of what did I want? That was a relationship with someone that was going to feel fulfilling, where, I felt seen, they felt seen, and we could go through life together. Um, and I knew before that happened that I would, need to have a girlfriend, perhaps a few girlfriends. Before that, go on some dates. Before that, ask people out, swipe, whatever it might be. And so I started seeing if there were certain clues that could help me sort of build out some numbers to manage my expectations around this.
Great. I like that.
And there was one interesting study, for example, that found when men were approaching women in real life, on average, 1 in 5 would get a yes. And so I said, great, I can probably roughly anticipate that, if I go and talk with 5 women, then, I'll walk away with 1 date. And then I needed to figure out, how many dates would it lead to getting a girlfriend? And then, how many girlfriends would it then take to get a partner? And on that last piece, that idea of what type of choice infrastructure is our brain able to make sense of? We talked about the jelly study earlier, and 6 seems to be a pretty good number for our brain to make sense of. And so if we're evaluating, prior partners with potential future partners and figuring out, where is that best fit? We're able to do that in a values aligned way when it's about 6. And so basically there ended up being these 3 different variables, how to get from A to B, B to C, C to D. And I ended up coming up with this kind of what was a shocking number when I did the math on it. I was like, oh my gosh, like I might need to ask out 300 people.
Yeah, I've circled it in your book right here, right? You have 5 times 60 equals 300. Like, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it was, the 1 in 5 people who I would ask out. And then once I had asked someone out, I figured, it might take, kind of going on 10 dates to find someone that you really want to date. And then maybe 6 partners that you are in a relationship with before you find someone who's your person. And so it was this 5 times 10 times 6 got us to this
Right.
300 number. And at first it was, I think, like overwhelming, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I really hope that's not the case. And that certainly wasn't the goal of it. The goal was to ask one person out and have that work. But the framework was based in a lot of these socio-psychological philosophies that when we can manage our expectations and that we have a certain tangible goal to focus on, we can go out, go on a date, have it not work out, and say, great, okay.
Right.
Well, now I
Right.
know that like I still have to put myself out there because I've created this expectation that like there is some work that goes into this, and reframe that like rejection, as I think it's typically referred to, as actually like a great success. Like, oh my gosh, I only have 299 more people to ask out. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because, again, obviously that's not the hope, but I think it is this helpful framework. It's something that I use with a lot of my clients around identifying what are those hurdles in your dating life. And if you're listening to this and trying to figure out what types of tangible actions you can take starting today to increase the probability of finding what it is that you want, think about spend a little time getting clear on what are those roadblocks. Do you
Yeah.
struggle to go on second dates? Do you struggle to put yourself in social places? Do you struggle to say hi to someone? And create some type of number. It doesn't need to be based in any type of academic literature. Just use a little common sense and say, great, if I
Right.
make a goal of talking to 20 people this year, am I going to have a higher chance than if I don't talk to any new people? Yeah, I think like common sense bears that out. And then we can sort of put that into action, use some of these accountability frameworks that I like to talk about as well, and be able to take agency over what is within my control. And then sort of again, manufacture the serendipity that you're hoping to invite into your life.
Well, and I think IRL is going to be an area where people can grow in because it's based upon their actions and their decisions to go and talk to someone, go to a new group, and you have an example, a couple examples in here of people who have done that with your coaching of, okay, so you're going to go to 3 new groups a month, right? And then you've held them accountable to that. But here's my question, and you said this earlier. You're like, well, if I talk to 5 women in real life, I'll get one date. How would you, as a man, or even to a female, and I have a line, like a good line that you can kind of say to anyone in real life, what are really good segues to just start chatting with somebody?
So I think it's very context dependent. And I think one thing that I like to caution about with a specific line, and sure, something like hi generally works, but people are very sensitive to context. And so
Right,
saying the same thing in the grocery store versus on a subway versus at sand volleyball, you're going to get some really different looks from people. And I think that's really what's important is what is the context? And if you're standing in line at Trader Joe's and someone has a a package of pot stickers on the conveyor belt in front of you,
right,
saying something like, "Hey, are those pot stickers good?" Makes a lot of sense. Whereas if
right,
like someone's on your sand volleyball team, like that's probably not the line you want to open up with. They're like,
right.
"What pot stickers? What are you talking about? This is insane." And so I think what I like to share with folks in general around this is I think there's sort of this pluralistic ignorance around people's perception of being approached and talked to in real life. Like we
Mm,
see people with noise canceling headphones, looking down at their
right.
phone,
Yep.
tapping through the self checkout, all of these points where we used to have touch points with humans, and we've sort of outsourced those things. And what's happened in the process is we assume that people don't want to be talked to, and there's actually some really interesting research that says the exact opposite. um, and I won't go too much into the study, but there's someone over at the University of Chicago who basically studied people in a waiting room, and he asked them, "Do you think you're going to be happier sitting and chatting to someone, or sitting and staying by yourself?" And most people assume they'd be happier by themselves on their phone. And then he had a separate group actually go and have those conversations, and he interviewed both sides, people who were initiating the conversations and people who
Okay.
were on the other side. And almost exclusively, what he found was people enjoyed having that social interaction, whether it was platonic or turned into something else. That was sort of beside the point. But I
Right.
think hopefully that de-stresses this idea of like, oh my gosh, people don't want to be talked to. And certainly there are times where we're like rushing through our lives and we might not have a time to sit and chat for 20 minutes, but even just like getting a smile and having someone say hi and make a goofy comment is really appreciated, I think, now more than ever.
I love that you said that. And so dating or not dating, we should all be working towards that goal. And I love Trader Joe's, big fan here. But it's interesting. It's kind of like common knowledge that a Trader Joe's worker always has to ask you a question. They always have to engage with you. It is part of the Trader Joe's way. And sometimes I'm like, I don't really want to talk to you right now. But they always will ask me a question anyway. Did you find everything you needed today? Like at other grocery stores, you're not going to find that. But that is part of their the dynamic at Trader Joe's, and it's good because then I start chatting with them anyway, even if I'm not in the mood. And it's needed. I am in a big group of women from our church, and so many of them share about loneliness. A lot of them are single, and there's just a lonely feeling, even though there's so many options and ways talk with people, right? DMs, texting, but you miss this face-to-face interaction, hearing a voice. Even the other day, my son sent me a little voice memo, and I thought, I heard his voice. I mean, the guy's 24, but just hearing his voice was different than just a text to me. And I said, son, I know you're busy, but if you want to make me those anytime, you can. It really touched my heart. So, 100% agreed on all of that. Now, when you were making this book, were you single, or like tell me the story behind the book? And were there any chapters that were a little bit difficult to write about?
I had been with my partner for about 2.5 years, probably, when I started writing the book. And I had the idea for the book, I mean, really, since I had started the research for it years before. What had originally held me back was we had met in person over at a coffee shop slash brewery here in Boulder. And I had gone up and asked her if I could plug in next to her because my computer was running low. And
But
we
was
got
it?
chatting.
But was
It
it?
it was not. It was not.
Hey, give that part
So
of the story. Guys need to hear that you have to be intentional. You have to like, and I have a whole podcast on going out solo. You have to look the bar. You have to, wherever it is you're going, yeah, you have to read the room, find that person. You have to be intentional about it. So I love that your computer was running low. Very cute.
And she and both of us love to tell that story. And it's, one of those more rare meet cute, fighting over the squash at the farmer's market type stories that we all love to have. And I think for a while I struggled to voice to her that, hey, like, actually this was very intentional on my end. And even though it's fun to just throw it up to serendipity, there were a lot of other times where maybe it wasn't plugging in the computer, but like I figured out a way to initiate a conversation to be able to see, like, is this something that can go somewhere? And I didn't know how that was going to be received. And so
Right?
one day we were sitting on the couch and talking about that. And she's saying, I just feel like there was something that, like, something intentional that brought us together. And I said, yeah, I think it's more intentional than you realize. And I could tell from the look on her face that she was sort of open to what it was that I was going to be sharing. And I told her, I said, yeah, well, that was actually, like, pretty intentional. And I was doing this, I was on this mission to find someone and putting myself out there. Um, and I told her, and she was so interested in it. And it just reaffirmed in my mind that she was the person for me because, like, she got it. She appreciated the intentionality behind it. And then from that moment, I said, I've been wanting to write this book. And we just on the couch right there started outlining the chapters. I said, this would be
That's
one of the chapters, and this would be one of the chapters. And so that was really how the book project got started.
That's amazing. I have to say, on behalf of all women, we adore when men are intentional towards us. Dating, married, whatever it is, that thoughtfulness is so important to us. And again, I have a girlfriend. She never wants flowers. She's like, "Don't give me flowers. I want flowers once a month. That's kind of my minimum. I would like flowers once a month." She's like, "But I want gift cards so I can go buy clothing." This is my math number. I told men, if you buy flowers once a month, 12 times a year out of 365 days, that's a 3% like investment, but you're going to get 100% back. Like, let me just tell you guys, that is a win for you. Get to know her favorite flower. I always say, always men should have a lifeline, which is her best friend. Like, my daughter is my lifeline. So if my husband is like, well, what should I get my wife or whatever it is, he can ask my daughter and she will always give some good recommendations. So he can be a winner. He can be the hero. Um, so we women love that stuff, and I love hearing that from you. And I do agree with you on the whole idea of read the room when you're going to have a line or when you're trying to find someone to chat with, you're in line at Starbucks and you're like, okay, I need a new drink. Can you give me a suggestion? But I also think that the safe one that I usually have is what brings you out today? What brings you out tonight? Which can be a good general start, because I remember once I became single, it took me 30 minutes to find the gumption to go talk to a guy. I had my eyes on this guy at a bar in New York, and I was like, he's so cute. But it took me 30 minutes, and I was sitting there chatting with a buddy of mine, and he's like, just go do it. I'm like, what do I say? What do I say? So if you just need a one-liner that kind of helps, is what brings you out today? Obviously, if you're at a volleyball tournament or whatnot, they could say that, but it still is a good starting point for those of us who are a little bit not as creative with intentional lines. Now, here's a question. And I get this all the time. Women are like, well, I am not going to do it. I want the man to do it. And I don't agree with that. I think women should be more intentional and have pickup lines or show these guys that you're interested. I have a girlfriend, she sent a guy a drink at a bar and they got married. So, what do you think of women taking the lead on this?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think everyone needs to operate within some degree of comfort, but we also need to push ourselves.
Yeah.
And certainly working with male clients, men love being approached by women. So
Yes.
there's that. And the data bears out that still overwhelmingly, women prefer to be approached. And so that doesn't mean that men don't also appreciate it, but I'm saying that, yes, I hear you if you're sitting there and want things to be done in a more traditional fashion. And you're going to go ahead and make someone's day if you go ahead and take the agency in it. And I think it I like to use this analogy of job hunting where you can sit there hoping that the right person is going to come and talk to you, the same way that you can hope that or the right recruiter is going to reach out to you on LinkedIn
Right.
and offer you your dream job. But if you're really after that special, once in a lifetime job, you need to go out and be the one to send your resume out, to schedule those informational interviews, to be submitting the applications to the places that you're really excited about, as opposed to just experiencing all of the spam inbound. And so if you're running into that problem and saying, gosh, like I am going out on dates and these people are asking me out, but I'm just not feeling like it's the right person, it could be because you're just responding to the recruiter as opposed to going out and finding what really works for you.
Well, and what I always say is that, we need to attract our equal, but we're also going to attract everything underneath that. And so don't be surprised when, people aren't quite your type, but they are trying to come to you. It's going to happen. So you need to get really clear about that. And look, I've twice in my life sent guys drinks. Okay. And both times those guys came over, they said hello, and both of them were in relationships. But they said, I'm so honored that you sent me this drink today. And I said, well, do you have any friends? Because if you're cute, I'm sure your friends are cute. And it's learning to flirt again, learning to take it like with what ducks on a water on a duck's back. Like you're not going to strike out on everyone, but you got to practice your hitting. So I'm a big fan of that. And I think that's what you're talking about in the strategy here. For someone listening who feels stuck or hopeless in their dating life, what is one small experiment or shift that they could try ASAP?
I love that question and the emphasis on the word experiment because I think so much of our dating lives, if we're doing it strategically, is experimental. We're iterating, we're trying things out, understanding what does and doesn't work, and then we're trying to do it in a little bit better way. And so it's incredibly context specific, of course, but let's imagine that someone isn't, is very routinized and like they do leave their house. Certainly, like if you're not getting out of your house much, that's one small experiment that you can try this week is to say, great, I work from home 5 days a week. Could you work out of a coffee shop one day next week? And just see how the surface area that you put out into the world for interactions maybe changes some of the results that you're having. And for those people who are heading out into the world or are interacting with apps, are you doing the same thing? Are you always heading to the yoga class at 5 p.m. on Tuesday and always meeting mostly the same people who go to the 5 p.m. Tuesday yin yoga class? And if that's the case, maybe switch up your studio this week. Maybe try the 5 p.m. on Wednesday or the lunchtime class or try Orange Theory instead of yoga this week.
Right.
And just being very intentional about how do I switch up what I'm doing to then be able to invite in different people who might have different routines than I do.
But you have to be specific to that because so if I'm a woman and I'm always going to Pilates, it's probably going to be full of women. So you need to actually, instead of changing the class to another Pilates class, which is probably full of women, you need to go hit golf balls. You need to go to man specific areas and men need to go to female specific areas so that they can really get to, the opposite sex. I always think about police officers and teachers. all day long. They work with, typically police officers are with a bunch of men and teachers are with a bunch of women, and they're like, all day long I just work with the same, the same sex. I need a different sex in my life. So you've got to go to the places where the opposite sex is. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's spot on and gets back to that strategic piece of
Yeah.
how can you be doing this intentionally and you can put yourself out there. But if we're thinking about, what are the small percentage of actions that lead to an outsized return, it really is being intentional about how do you stack that area to be somewhere where like, yes, you're comfortable, but also you're able to meet the type of people who hang out in those spots.
Well, and here's another one I tell people. With your married friends specifically, if you have happy married friends, please get them on your team because every woman wants to be a matchmaker. And you need to say, hey girl, who do you know? Who can you introduce me to? Even the older ladies, like you get women in their 60s, oh, they're happy to help you out. So ask these people, like, who do you know? Do you have anybody for me? Let people know that you're single. It's maybe a little intimidating or embarrassing, but it shouldn't be. Like you're on a mission, you're on a goal. I had a client one time, I was like, you need to start telling everybody, who do you have for me? Now the sad thing is, and again, this is where like disappointment comes in. A lot of those people will say, well, I know guys, but I would never set you up with them. Like, how do we as women, and I'm just going to ask for the women in general, how do we navigate the idea that although there's this many men, the quality of men is hard to find? Like, how do we encourage ourselves in that?
So I think there are a couple things. One gets to expectations and understanding if we are going into this idea of I'm going to join this co-ed volleyball, and if I don't meet my perfect match, then this has been a fundamental mistake or waste of time. I think the mindset needs to shift a little bit to what are the things that I genuinely enjoy doing. And so if you love sand volleyball, great, head out to sand volleyball. And if you love gardening, maybe head to the plant store a little bit more frequently. But so I think one is this idea of, our happiness is our expectations minus reality. And so if we can reframe what those expectations are, we can't necessarily completely shift reality, but that can have an outsized impact on our happiness. So that would be one thing. And then I think in terms of this idea of where do we find quality people, I think it gets back to this experimental mindset. And so if you're not finding your type of people over at Safeway, maybe try doing your grocery shopping over at Whole Foods. And maybe those are
Exactly.
more your people. Or maybe you love the Safeway people and you've been shopping at Whole Foods. And so, you switch things up and go in the other direction. But I think being willing to change things up and run these little dating experiments can be really helpful for unearthing the types of people that you're hoping to meet.
Well, and I'm a big believer that women should go out by themselves because I know that when I'm with another girlfriend, we're usually intense. A guy is a little intimidated to just come by and say hello. And then it's almost like he's not sure how to say like, oh, I like this girl versus this girl, and the girl, it can get a little confusing.
And one thing I'd encourage listeners to do is to do a little pattern recognition. And so if you're saying I'm not meeting the type of men or women for that matter who I want to be meeting, or I've been in some toxic relationships, I've been attracting the wrong type of people, pull out a piece of paper and jot down the list of the last dozen or so dates, relationships, whatever it might be that you've been on, and maybe it's just one or two, maybe it's not any, but if you have a list and say, where am I meeting these people? And start understanding, okay, did I meet a lot of people on Tinder? And maybe actually like that's not my type of person. Maybe I switch over to Hinge, or maybe I try some more in real life things. Or maybe I did meet these people in real life, but I met them, over at a monster truck rally, and it ended up that
Love
like
Monster Truck. I think it's so fun, but here's what I would say is although I love Monster Truck, it's usually not my people. I would rather go to a high-end steakhouse. So I would encourage people, again, if you're looking for a guy who can eat at a high-end steakhouse on a Tuesday by himself, then you need to go to that steakhouse. Or if you're cool with going to Monster Truck, those are your people, go to that kind of thing. But I do want to encourage people, and again, I'm a believer first dates usually should be a good sit-down dinner. Just for the ease of it. I've had dates try to go hiking. I've had dates try to go biking. It's like everybody just sit down, just dress up nice and sit down, at least in our world of matchmaking. And you want to be going to those places that you want to go to on dates. So I'm not going to go over to Ruby Tuesdays to meet a guy if I want to be eating dinner at a nice steakhouse. You've got to kind of be in that environment of what you want. And hey, if anybody wants to go to Monster Truck, I'm all for it, because that shows you if you're fun or not. Because if you can't have fun at Monster Truck, then you are just boring. So I love that you even brought that up. You've actually throughout this podcast brought up a lot of real life places. I mean, you're like Safeway, sand volleyball, Monster Truck. I'm like, if people cannot, I mean, they could ask Grok at this point. What are 27 places I can meet people in real life? So I love that you're bringing all of this up. Great advice. So here's another question. Why do people ghost, and what can we do about it?
I think there's this perception that people ghost because they're inconsiderate. And I think when I was dating myself, that's very much how I looked at it. And then I read this study that came out in May of last year from a researcher over at NYU. And what they found when they started to interrogate people, where does this ghosting behavior come from, is they found this commonality that people had what are called pro-social behaviors. So they're trying to spare the feelings of anyone on the other side, and actually
Right.
comes from this fairly generous place. Unfortunately, it's misguided, right? And so we are assuming that we're helping people out, sparing them the hard conversation,
Right.
but there's something, and I don't know if I'll get it quite right, but that the psychologist Adam Grant says, and he says, candor stings briefly, but we leave this open wound when we're not honest with people. And I think ghosting is a very similar thing, where it's a tough text to receive, to say, hey, thanks for the time yesterday. I appreciated that you were willing to go out to the steakhouse. I didn't feel a romantic connection, but I wish you
Yeah.
good luck, finding the person who's right for you.
That's
And
maturity.
mhm,
That is your green flag to maturity of somebody, and that's going to happen no matter what. So anyone who, and I have people who are like, "Well, Katie, I don't want to hurt their feelings." We're all adults here, and if they're not, that's on them. That's not on you. But you've got to do the right thing. So as good as that sounds, I just do not think it's ever a way to go. And you always want to be in the upright of, "Hey, I said my piece." I do believe in the first 3 dates, you can text that. I have seen, and if you do a call, then the people are like, well, what did I do? And I recently had a guy that I coached, and she literally said, you didn't look like your pictures. And that was very deceiving. So when we did the coaching call, he said she didn't want a second date because I think she was overwhelmed by me. I said, that's not what she said. She gave you full feedback that said, you don't look like your pictures. And I'm looking at him, and he's 30 pounds overweight compared to his pictures. I said, you don't look, you're overweight. And that's the end of story. But he just told himself that, wow, she was overwhelmed. I was probably her perfect guy. I'm like, no, buddy, you're telling yourself a whack job here. And again, I think I prefer people to be honest than kind. Like, I don't know if it's like an East Coast girl thing. And even though like, I feel like there's that honesty, I prefer people to be honest than nice. So I think even though people will use that as their excuse, I believe that it's immaturity on their part to not be able to have a quick text conversation that says, "Hey, thanks for dinner at the steakhouse. It was great. You're gonna do well in dating. Bless you." Like, that's it.
mhm,
You wrote it perfectly. If people need to rewind, write it down what he said, and just send that. Just change the location. So I love that.
mhm.
Okay, so here's a
Yeah.
question. Flags. Green flag, red flag, yellow flags, and now the beige flag. Have you heard of the beige flag?
No, tell me about the beige
Okay, so
flag.
beige flags, I just learned this yesterday myself, are like things that make you quirky that will eventually bother somebody. Like, not that I ever want to tell somebody that beige flag about myself. But it's interesting because my husband doesn't like it when I crunch chips. It's his own thing. It's not just me, it's anybody. But throughout our entire years of dating, I had never known this until we got married. And then he's like, "Could you not crunch a chip like that?" I'm like, "What? Since when?" To me, that's a beige flag. But what would you say? What would be a green flag people should look for, a yellow flag, and a red flag? And if you could think of a beige flag, but
Yeah, so I think We can turn to a lot of the relationship science that in part has been developed by the Gottmans, who you mentioned earlier, who, if you're listening to this and aren't familiar with them, they're terrific. And they used to run something called the Love Lab, where they would have people come in for anywhere for like 24 to 72 hours, and they would monitor their behavior. They'd have them hooked up to all these biometrics, so that these couples would come in and they could see, when are their heart rates spiking, and they would do urine samples to understand, what are the cortisol levels and all of these indicators for when people are stressed versus at ease. And they came up with a very elaborate coding system to understand what are the types of factors that really lead to long-term happiness. And they'd follow these couples over, decades in some cases, and they
Amazing.
could predict with over 90% certainty of just watching a couple for 24 hours, are they still going to be together in 5, 10, 15 years? And what they found was that there are certain qualities like kindness, generosity, truthfulness,
Mm,
emotional stability that really do matter for long-term happiness. Things that they didn't find a strong correlation were things like how tall is someone,
right.
how did they look, um, you know, what, I think a lot of these filters that were provided by dating apps that it turns out in terms of long-term marital satisfaction really don't move the needle. And so then I think to get back to your question, Katie, which I think is a great one, is how do we begin to look for the indicators for these traits that actually do matter? One that I think is talked about a fair bit, but I really do think is great and tangible, is if you're out to that nice steakhouse like you're talking about, how's the person treating not just you, but the wait staff, the person who is seating you? Are they thanking them for refilling the water glass when their steak comes out and it's a little bit overcooked? Are they making a big deal out of it? Or are they saying kindly like, hey, I understand like this wasn't you, but I did order this medium well, and do you mind just putting this back in for a little bit? Thank you so much. I'm sorry to add to your day. And I think those pieces of character really shine through in those moments where things aren't going well and someone responds in a kind way to someone who they don't have anything to gain by treating them well, except for, being a good human being and all of those
Right.
things.
Yeah, I
Um,
wish there was a kindness-o-meter. I mean, I think people would just date better and be better if there was. But there definitely is a he's got a good head of hair o meter, which again,
mhm,
that's preference. That is not gonna, that doesn't mean he's gonna love you if you get cancer. And at the end of the day, I always say you want someone who's gonna wipe your butt and then you're gonna
mhm,
wipe theirs. Like there has to be that, like, yes, I'm here for you kind of connection. Okay, so then in reality, and I mean, we can't necessarily, you say, okay, so the green flag would be someone who's kind on a first date. Again, sitting down to dinner, watching them interact. That's also why it's a little bit of a test that we're watching. I know women love it when men, maybe if you're at a steakhouse, you've got sides in the middle of the table when they serve you first.
mhm,
Huge. I love it when a man asks the woman for the preference of water. When they come by and they're like, well, do you want sparkling flat or house water? And instead of him deciding, he defers to her. I know that men love it when women have their phone off. That's a green flag rather than it buzzing. I've heard stories of just their phone, the woman's purse is buzzing all night long, and he's like, or she was in the bathroom for a very long time. Like those are not green flags for a lady. Now, what would be like a yellow flag that they could take after a first date that's like, I don't know.
mhm. Yeah, so and I love those examples. I think those are so good. And if you don't mind, I'm going to pirate some of those moving forward. I think that was
We
just
can
such
talk
a,
more. I got more examples.
those, yeah, the phone being away, I think is huge, and just being present, and not to harp on too much of the research, but there's just so much. Helen Fisher is this researcher over at MIT who studies technology and how it affects our relationships. And, unsurprisingly, having your phone even on the table, even if it's turned down, is really distracting. And we just don't want to open up and be vulnerable when we feel like if we're in the middle of sharing something very important to us and the phone buzzes, that their attention could be taken away at any moment. It just doesn't foster that same level of intimacy. And so I'm so glad you brought that up. I think it's super important. And then as far as yellow flags, there's a woman by the name of Logan Ury. She's a dating coach. She also runs the behavioral science team over at Hinge, and she talks about things called permissible pet peeves. And I think this is a really interesting concept because we have these things which are, funny when we're talking to our friends after a date of like, oh, I just got the ick when, they started breathing out of their mouth or when they, walked duck-footed or whatever it might be. And back to your example of, God forbid you have cancer or like when you're navigating hard things with your parents and trying to figure out, do we need to like put them into a home? Like what's going on with that? And, filling out your taxes and just doing all of the little like mundane things of life. Whether someone walks duck-footed really doesn't bear
No.
much on your emotional state when those hard things or those mundane things, those quotidian, like everyday things are happening. And so I would say more like yellow flags. I almost look as an opportunity for you as a dater to be able to grow and say, I recognize this is a sticking point or has been a sticking point in the past. Or maybe I dated someone who walked duck footed and it didn't end well. And so now I have some like trauma around this and I'm projecting those values onto this, innocent person who like said thank you to the waiter and put his phone away and
Right.
did all the other green flag things. So really I would look at those as, like I said, an opportunity for you to iterate on your dating skills and be able to say like, what is really important? How do I recognize that? And then how can I take action that's aligned with those observations?
And you bring up such great examples because I dated a guy that had duck feet. He walked like this. He was bald and he had terrible teeth. And I have a whole podcast on it. It's the nice guy, or it's the rich guy, the old guy, and the nice guy. And as much as the duck-footed guy was so nice, I just couldn't move forward with them. So there are times when like the physicality, it was just like, oh, I can't get past that one. And it wasn't just the duck feet, it was just the whole look and he didn't want to get braces and whatever. But you're right. But you mentioned the other things. He actually was phenomenal. He adored my kids, he adored me. So there are the standards, and the inner man that he was great. I just couldn't kiss the outer man. So that's okay. That happens. Chemistry is important. I would say the spark needs to be there. So those are great. What are some serious red flags? Like, of course, everyone says when they start talking about their ex on a first date, actually love that. I love it when people just bring it up and start sharing because it gives me kind of an insight to their world, their thinking, how they do difficulty, how they responded to all that. What are other red flags that are just like run? What would you say?
I think little examples of being inconsiderate because I think we're presumably bringing our best self to the date and we're putting on this performative face. And even if in that peak moment we can't be bothered to be considerate of the little things like you said, filling the water glass first or thanking the server or putting your phone away, then when the stresses of life begin to compound, when you let your guard down a little bit more, I think it is frequent that you're going to see those type of people's character really come out in a more dramatic fashion. And so I think just hitting the rewind button, listening to all of the green flags that you were articulating so well there, Katie, and then saying the lack of those.
Yeah, yeah. Like communication is huge. If a man or woman cannot respond to you in a timely manner, and maybe that's 24 hours, maybe they have a high demanding job, maybe they're with their kids that weekend. If that's not being honored, and I often say to women, mirror his efforts. Like women are looking for men with that intentionality. But if you're into him, you should mirror that. So he feels like, okay, she's into me. But when a woman is not mirroring that to a man, he needs to consider that a red flag as well. And when a man is not putting in that effort, women need to say, hey, that's a red flag. Because sometimes they're just not that into you, but they do like, and you brought this up, the validation of anyone sending a text, swiping yes on me. And that is a dangerous place because that is not where the depth of a real relationship grows. So,
Hmm.
all right, what is, aside from your book, which, by the way, how do we find your book, Date Smarter?
My book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, most places that books are sold. You can also head over to timothymolnar.com and learn more about me and my work there. There's a book page if you're interested, some articles to give you a better idea of my thought process and the types of content that I've put out. So any of those places are great.
Yes, yes, and I'll link it all below and I'll put it on my Instagram as well. I mean, you have done the research. Like all this for me is just like street smarts, but I love the fact that you're quoting different things and people who've done the research because it's so interesting. Because if anything that matters in this world, it's our relationships. And if I'm like you, you're like me, we want to do them well and we want to do them right and we want to find that right person. And I know my followers are going to super appreciate your encouragement. Your book is fun to read. And you've got a lot of cute kind of applicable, you've got QR codes, like good meeting venues, like you've got to participate in your book here. Pen to paper, people. So I highly recommend this book, Date Smarter. All right, you guys. Well, Tim, thank you so much for your time. One last question. What is your favorite book?
Ooh, my favorite book, I'd say at the moment it's probably James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Okay.
And I do cite that a bit throughout the book. I think this idea of how we turn our little actions into something that really magnifies what's important to us in life is so important and valuable. And particularly for people in a dating context, thinking about what those little habits are that can compound and cast votes for the type of person that you want to be, the type of dater that you want to be, the type of relationship that you want to invite into your life. So I really recommend that to people who are dating or just trying to figure out how to create better habits for themselves in general.
I love it. Well, I'm going on vacation. I always need a good new book, but thank you for yours. And we will probably have to circle back and have you on again, just because the complexities of all this is beyond just one session. So thanks again for having us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much, Katie. It was so fun. I really appreciate it.